Welcome to Sifting Through the Rubble. Today we are going to take a look at the principle Optimus Magister Bonus Liber, or Optimus Magister Bonus Liber Est. That's the best teacher is a good book. Partially, this is to prepare us for the article for next week for Coffee with the Headmaster on the Great Books by Mortimer Adler. But also, this is for us to talk about what makes a good book, what makes a great book, what do those terms mean and how are they used. And then we could also discuss sort of how we do approach books, maybe how we shouldn't approach books, and what we can do with books. There's a lot to talk about from that perspective. So in review, we have covered Make Haste Slowly, Festina Lente, Multum non multa, Much Not Many, Decendo Discimus, By Teaching We Learn, and last week, Repetitio Mater Memoriae, Repetition is the Mother of Memory. Today we look at The Best Teacher is a Good Book. Now, a couple of things about good books before we talk about maybe the great books and some specific books. A classical education inclines children towards the good, the true, and the beautiful. And when we say a good book, we're not really saying what's good for one person and good for another, but we are looking for a good as a sort of a higher objective quality in a book. What makes a good book? Is it because it teaches only good things? Is it because it teaches about sort of bad things like vices well, as opposed to inclining you toward a vice, but instead warning you away from one? What makes a good book? I think what is important to remember is that reading is a skill that first comes with age, in terms of us reading, and second is a skill that develops over time, not only as we get, as children become better readers, but also that the content is sort of specific to the age. There are certain books, and many of the great books are books that are good, but we wouldn't start our bedtime story routine with our infants and our toddlers with, say, the works of Sigmund Freud, which are on the great books list. They are books that are part of the great conversation of Western civilization, but they're not good books for 3-year-olds or even for 10-year-olds or 17-year-olds. You may want to wait a while to tackle the works of Sigmund Freud. So a good book. Good books and the great books are a key part of a classical education. We care about good literature being read to our students reading good literature, exposing them to good books, forming their tastes to like good books. There's a sort of a truism out there that as long as children are reading, that's fine. But I like food metaphors. And we wouldn't really agree as long as children are eating. That's fine. It doesn't matter what they eat, right? I mean, when you think about eating, do we want children to eat everything and anything? There are certain things that we don't want them to eat, either because they're not food or not good for them. And I think the same thing needs to be said of books. There are books that are not good for children, either because of their age or because of the content of the book, or maybe the books that we like or know or have been exposed to are predominantly cotton candy, and you can't survive on cotton candy. You need milk, you need meat. So when we're thinking about good books, it's important to start with the objective instead of going into taste. There's a difference between that which is admirable and that which is estimable or lovable. We should be able to admit that things are good, even though they're not our favorite. And I think that's a very important distinction that a classical education instills in children and adults, that there are objective things that are true outside of us, maybe even in spite of us. And when we talk about good books being the best teacher, a book which is truly good does teach us in a number of ways. Now, another sort of fallacy about books comes in how we treat them. So you can see behind me, there's an awful lot of books. And if you've been in my office, you've seen them. If you've been in my home, you'll also know that there's a lot of books, and I don't know what your homes or offices look like. But sometimes we treat the books like trophies, where we keep them up there as reminders of our conquests. Other times we just keep them up there so it looks like we're reading. But it's important to actually read books, one, and when we read them, to wear through them. This is a book which is a very good book, and maybe the first of the, sorry, it's backwards, but one of the first of the recommendations, Tending the Heart of Virtue, How Classic Stories Awaken a Child's Moral Imagination. This book is about how books do teach. Vigen Guroian is the author. He's Armenian. I'll chat it. Yep, there it is. Tending the Heart of Virtue by Vigen Guroian. Good, and there's his spelling. He does a really wonderful job in this book of going through how stories teach us. He talks about Pinocchio and the Velveteen Rabbit, The Little Mermaid, The Wind in the Willows, Charlotte's Web, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, The Princess and the Goblin, other Narnia books like Prince Caspian. And so this book is a very good book showing how books teach us and inform our imagination, our morality, our virtue. The reason why I picked it up is you'll see, if you're to look at my copy of the book, although I haven't written in it, I do have lots of dog ears. I think some people are very hesitant to write in their books or to dog ear their books. But when you read the book, you should be using it in such a way that you can remember what you've done in it. Either writing notes in the book or having notes stuck in the book. If we follow the other principles, like make haste slowly and much not many, then the books that we do read or that we expose our children to, we should want A, to carefully choose, and B, to really read them, to take them in, to use a phrase from one of our collects on the Holy Scriptures, to inwardly digest them. The quote I have from Adler on our Pedagogical Principles page, in the case of good books, the point is not to see how many of them you can get through, but rather how many can get through to you. This quote is a very good one because books do things to us. Now, of course, the best book, the good book, is the Holy Scriptures, the Bible, and it is the only book that really works on the heart actively instead of us internalizing the words and the words doing something to us the way we do with any novel, like, and some of the books that I'll talk about in a minute. The Holy Scriptures are living and active. The Holy Spirit is actually working through those words when we read them to form our heart and our mind. It's the most active book you'll ever read. All the other books we read do certainly make an impression. And many of you can probably think of either your favorite books Or maybe if it's not your favorite, books that caused you to have a certain reaction or that bring you to a certain time of your life. Books do get through to us as we read them. And again, I've got three with me that I think, when I think of good books that have taught me and that have sort of stuck with me, even though I haven't read them in a while, but I intend to read them again soon. Good books will do that. They will stick with you. They will teach you and continue to teach you as you read them. Let's look at this concept of great books next. So the great books specifically are an addition of different books. This is volume 1 of the great books put together by Adler and Dorn. I'm going to share, I have the list up, which I will hand out next week. Let me just share this. I will have this next week in our Coffee with the Headmaster. So the great books are a carefully cultivated list of books from history. There are ancient books on this list, there are more modern books on this list, and it's a very comprehensive list. That's sort of the point. And we have copies of the great books upstairs in our upper library for the upper school. You can see here names of books that you may recognize and names of books that you may not recognize. And these books cover a variety of angles and topics and approaches. They're not all history. They're not all philosophy. Some are plays. Euclid's Elements is math. Archimedes, too. Archimedes is famous for the screw and for Eureka, I found it, for displacement. Cicero, Lucretius, these are all very important Greeks and Romans who have contributed to the great conversation on a variety of topics. In the great books by Adler and Dorn, there are volume 2 and volume 3 are actually called the Book of Ideas, and they take concepts like evil, humility, love, and trace them through this list of great books and the different works. By the time we get here, it speeds up a little bit, but you can see the Old and New Testament are included in the great books. Plotinus, who's a philosopher, Augustine, who's one of the best examples of Christian doctrine and philosophy from the late antique period. Then you have medieval works. You have the Nibelungenlied. This is where later Richard Wagner will give us the Saga of the Ring in the world of opera. The Guide for the Perplexed is actually written by a Jewish philosopher, Maimonides. You have Thomas Aquinas, Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the Decameron, Canterbury Tales. So you can see, and I'll keep scrolling while I talk, there's any number of books on here, some of which are on our reading list for our upper school students, some of which you may remember from great illustrated classics versions as a child or that your children have now. There are a variety of ways to access these books. Just being familiar with the concept could be enough for a small child. That reading through the entire, like Don Quixote is a massive novel that takes time and really is for an older person. But the concepts of Don Quixote are certainly good for teaching children about what it means to chase after windmills. You'll see also some very important texts in the field of science in the great books. Galileo, Kepler, on Harvey on animals, political treatises like Hobbes and his Leviathan, as well as Boyle's Skeptical Chemist. We have Milton, there's John Bunyan, there's Pascal, there's some more on politics, Locke, Spinoza on ethics. So all kinds of things are included, and there are quite a number of volumes. You can see the list keeps going and going all the way into the 19th and 20th century, some of which you may recognize from high school, like The Scarlet Letter or Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. There's Marx and Engels. There's The Russians. There's Moby Dick. And then we get to the late 19th and the early 20th century. So you've got Mark Twain, who is certainly one of the great authors. Freud, Planck on quantum theory, George Bernard Shaw, Proust and Thomas Mann. Dewey is included in here, who's a very influential American educational thinker. Classical education stands sort of against Dewey, but another thing that's important about reading the great books is that it could be good for teaching you what you need to be aware of. And the great books do pull from all of Western civilization. So we don't want to only read things that we agree with. We do want to read things that we disagree with, either at the onset, and maybe the goal is to agree with them, or we know that we disagree with it, but we read it so we can know the argument better. There are lots of ways in which the book can be a teacher. So you can see there's hundreds, 164 in terms of authors included in this great books list, all the way up to the mid-20th century, like Solzhenitsyn and Sartre. These are important for us to understand with Solzhenitsyn, to understand communism and totalitarianism, with Sartre, to understand what it means for someone to believe that there's no point to life. Existentialism is alive and well in a lot of places, and to know that, again, not something you read in fourth grade, certainly something you wait to cover when you have a good Christian philosophical and theological worldview, but it is an important book to read. Now, those are the great books. I'd like to talk a minute or two about books that I would say have been good teachers for me, and then I'll open it up for questions, comments on the best teacher is a good book. I have three here, and I could pick a lot, but three that have stuck with me for a long time. The first is, and this is no particular order, is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. Dostoevsky may appear in a high school list of your past, certainly can appear on our list in the future. Dostoevsky is well known for Crime and Punishment, as well as for the Brothers Karamazov. Sometimes he's called a Christian existentialist, sometimes he's viewed as a nihilist, but what's good about Crime and Punishment, what makes it a good book, is that it teaches the limits of humanity even when we think that there aren't any, and the significance of the redemptive power of the gospel of Jesus. That is a key theme here in Crime and Punishment. If you haven't read this is worth it. If you like, I love Russian literature, so this was sort of predestined to be one of my top books. But this is a very, very good book, especially for older students and certainly for adults. The second is the Iliad by Homer. I carried these books around a lot in high school, but they've stuck with me ever since. The Iliad is one of the greatest books of all time, was part of the canon early on of what it meant to be an educated person. It is an epic poem. It is not a novel, although there are sort of novelized versions of it. What I appreciate about it is it teaches you about honor and valor, about priorities and values, about the place of the emotions and of family as a high school student, I was on the side of the Greeks. I told some people this. Now, when I read it and think about it, I'm on the side of the Trojans. I find Hector very, very not only likable but admirable in what he stands for. But a long time ago, I saw sort of Odysseus and the Greek heroes as my heroes. And now things have changed a little bit as you grow, which also is a neat thing about good books, is that you grow with them, even as they just sort of sit here. The last one I have is the Divine Comedy. You can see it's pretty well worn. I carried this around a lot, and it has stuck with me a long time. It, again, is epic poetry. It's originally written in Italian by Dante Alighieri, a famous Florentine. It is a very fascinating book, a tour of hell, purgatory, and paradise. Certainly, Lutherans don't endorse the concept of purgatory, but theologically. But when it comes to what Dante's trying to get across, it's a very fascinating read. This version, the John Chiardi version, is my favorite. It also has the most notes. So if you have ever wanted to tackle the Divine Comedy, I recommend getting this one. It is thick, but there's a lot of great notes in it. And those for me, not only are good books, but are lifelong teachers. The last thing I wanted to mention is the value of reading aloud when it comes to the best teacher is a good book. We tend to read silently, and we've done that as humanity for a long time. Really, that starts with the monks and monasticism. Reading out loud was normal prior to the monastic movement and quiet meditation and reading. But reading aloud at home, we read aloud in the school, certainly. But reading out loud at home forms children to be active listeners of books, to love books, to receive books. There's the Read-Aloud revival from Sarah Mackenzie. I can't remember the name of her book offhand, but it's a very good book too. We've reviewed it on our blog, our school blog. She also has a podcast and a website, book lists of things to read aloud at home for various ages. Reading out loud with your children is a very important part of parenting and something worth taking time to do, even though, of course, there's not very much time to do it in with the way life is. But reading out loud is one of the best ways for these good teachers, these best teachers, these good books to influence our home life, our home conversation, how we're raising our children at home. So that, in a bit of a nutshell, there it is, the Read-Aloud family. Very good. That's the name of that. Is sort of a bird's eye view of The Best Teacher is a Good Book. While we've got 7 minutes, are there any thoughts, reflections, your own good books, questions? Our book list for Liber School is up on our website. I don't know if our 1st through 8th book list is up on the website, but I have it in shareable form, and we need to get it up there. Our school is devoted to reading good literature. Yes, Betty.
Sorry, I hit that by mistake.
That's all right.
Can you?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, yeah. Just general comment. I've really enjoyed your sessions every week, and yeah, I don't have a particular contribution to this particular session today.
No, well, I'm happy to do them. Thanks for your kind words.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Allison has been kind enough to post the book review that Mrs. Bohat did. Read-Aloud family is very good. My wife has enjoyed it. I know lots of moms have read it. Dads should not be afraid to read out loud. I don't know if there are any dads here who are afraid to read out loud, but mom and dad modeling reading is very good for children. Not only are the books going to teach that you read your children, but you teach by how you read. When you read at home, if you don't read at home, having books in the house, these are all helpful ways of showing children what they can learn, because so many, now of course there's plenty of bad things printed in books, but books have done so much for the preservation of civilization. I have at home how the Irish saved civilization, and the Irish did it through the copying of books. Certainly it was in the monastery, it was Irish Christianity that assisted in saving civilization. But books have played a very important role in teaching humanity, in preserving humanity, the scriptures for one. But even as we become more and more technological, it's even that much more important to have paper in your hands and to read. If you want, Kindles are fine. Kindles are great, but you remember more when there's paper in your hand. There are studies, I'd have to get links for that, but there are studies that have shown that holding a book in one's hand, underlining and writing, helps keep the book in your head and as a part of you in a way that scrolling through on your computer or your device doesn't nearly have the same effect. Other comments or questions on good books? The Best Teacher is a Good Book is our topic for today here on Sifting Through the Rubble. Nothing, huh? Well, hopefully, all of you not only will appreciate the books that we read with your children here and that they bring home, but will use this as an opportunity to be inspired to read good things. It's important to take time out to read. We do a lot of commuting in our family, and so we have an awful lot of audio for our book reading. And there are great audio versions of many excellent books, both for children and on the adult side, in terms of the great books. And the public libraries, even when we can't get into them because of the current situation. Audiobooks you can check out. Even on your phone, there are apps to download audiobooks and have in the car. My boys especially, all of my children, but my boys have enjoyed having good audiobooks in the car. Next week is Coffee with the Headmaster. And Coffee with the Headmaster will talk again about the great books. Like I said, I'll print out that list of the great books, and we'll have the article. I'll try to include the article in the newsletter today that we'll discuss from Mortimer Adler on the great books. Our next topic for Sifting Through the Rubble will be the topic of Scole, which is restoring leisure to learning, and a book that I'll bring next week, I see it over there on the shelf, is Joseph Pieper's Leisure, the Basis of Culture, which is a really important book for this discussion. So next week, join us if you can. We will, I think we'll probably live stream it and then save it to YouTube and have it posted. But next week is Coffee with the Headmaster. And then tentatively on the 9th will be our next Sifting Through the Rubble on Scole, restoring leisure and rest to learning. All right, it is 10 o'clock, and that's all the time we have for this edition of Sifting Through the Rubble. We'll have this posted at some point today on YouTube for future viewing and perhaps enjoyment, if that can be gained. And we will see those of you next week who attend Coffee with the Headmaster, and if not, till next time on Sifting Through the Rubble. Thanks for joining us. Have a great Friday.